title of our first lecture is What is Metaphysics? How do human beings make sense of reality at the deepest level? Metaphysics is one of those philosophical words that seems to carry an air of mystery as soon as it is spoken. Many people assume it has something to do with crystals or ghosts, while others imagine it to be an abstract branch of philosophy that floats far above ordinary human life. Yet metaphysics, if understood properly, is neither distant nor decorative. It is one of the most intimate aspects of human thinking. It concerns the background structure of our experience, the silent frameworks that shape our understanding of the world, the invisible assumptions we carry with us whenever we say something exists, or changes, or causes something else. Even without noticing, each of us walks around with a largely unexamined metaphysical worldview. We interpret events, judge situations, plan our lives, and think about ourselves according to certain deep convictions about what reality is and how it works. Most of the time, these convictions remain hidden from us because they operate constantly and reliably. It is only when we pause, when something puzzles us or challenges our habitual perspective, that we begin to sense that behind our everyday thoughts there lies a deeper layer of beliefs. The name metaphysics has a curious origin. After Aristotle's death, his writings were arranged by editors who placed a set of treatises after the physics. These came to be called ta metaphysica, which means the things that come after the physical works. Over the centuries, this textual arrangement gave rise to a philosophical term that now designates the inquiry into the fundamental structure of reality. Interestingly, the name does not describe the content, but the position of the texts. Yet the word stuck, and today metaphysics refers to the most basic questions one can ask about existence. Like, what does it mean for something to be real? What are the fundamental categories of the world? How does change happen? What kind of things can exist? Does time flow? What is a cause? How can something remain the same through change? These metaphysical questions are metaphysical questions because they reach beyond the surface of things and examine what must be true for our experience, our sciences, and our personal lives to make sense. Before going any further, it is helpful to grasp what metaphysics is by noticing how it appears in daily life. Imagine a child who asks whether colors still exist when nobody is looking. Or consider a teenager who wonders whether they will be the same person in 10 years, even though everything about them will have changed. When someone reflects on whether time moves or simply seems to move, they are engaging in metaphysical thinking, in fact. Adults do it too, often without noticing. When we justify a decision by saying that something had to happen, or when we insist that everything has a cause, or when we say that a promise binds us because we remain the same person who made it, we are presupposing metaphysical stances. These stances are usually not articulated, but they form the structure that guides our thinking. One of the best illustrations of this hidden structure is David Foster Wallace's famous allegory of the fish. Two young fish swim along and meet an older fish who greets them by saying, "Good morning, boys. How is the water?" The young fish swim on silently for a while before one of them turns to the other and asks, "What is water?" The water is the medium through which they exist, so constant and familiar that they do not even notice it. In a similar way, our metaphysical assumptions surround us completely. They guide how we interpret the world, but remain invisible because we rarely question them. We are so familiar with them that we take them for granted. To do metaphysics is to begin noticing the water in which we swim. Metaphysics is not an optional set of abstract questions that only philosophers need to think about. Each of us, even as children, already carries a complex set of beliefs about what exists, what changes, what remains, what causes what matters, and what it means to be a person. These beliefs shape our decisions, relationships, and perceptions. The purpose of metaphysics is to bring these hidden beliefs to light, to examine them carefully, and to see whether they hold up to scrutiny. Without such examination, we risk living inside assumptions that may not serve us, or that may conflict with one another without our noticing. At times of confusion or crisis, metaphysical reflection becomes indispensable because it helps us see the roots of our anxieties and expectations. Many sudden changes in life, such as moving to a new country or ending a long relationship or choosing a profession, bring metaphysical questions to the surface. We wonder what makes a life meaningful, what endures and what not, what kind of world we are moving through. These questions, far from being academic curiosities, shape our identities and our actions. Every person, whether they know it or not, lives according to a worldview, a more or less coherent picture of how reality is organized. Some worldviews are simple and unexamined, based on habits inherited from parents or culture. Others are more reflective, formed through education or personal experience. A worldview includes beliefs about what kinds of things exist, whether the world has a deeper meaning, how time passes, what counts as evidence, how change happens, and what does it mean to be a human. When two people disagree deeply about something, the roots of the disagreement often lie in their metaphysical commitments rather than in the surface topic of the argument. A worldview acts as a lens, giving shape to what we expect from the world and from other people. Someone who believes that nature unfolds according to strict laws may evaluate freedom, responsibility, and accident differently from someone who views the world as more open and indeterminate. Someone who believes that every event has a purpose will interpret misfortune differently from someone who considers events to be meaningless occurrences in a vast universe. These differences do not merely influence intellectual conversations. They influence how we comfort others, how we make plans, how we raise children, and how we face difficulties. In this way, metaphysics quietly enters the texture of daily life. Human beings develop their worldviews gradually. They absorb ideas from family, culture, stories, religions, sciences, and personal experiences. A worldview is rarely a single unified picture. More often, it is a mosaic formed from countless impressions, some consistent, others contradictory. Part of the work of metaphysics is to bring clarity to this mosaic, to understand why some pieces clash and how they might be re-examined or rearranged. A reflective person does not merely inherit a worldview, but refines it. This is what philosophical education aims to cultivate. To understand where metaphysical thinking began in Western culture, we need to turn to the earliest Greek philosophers, the thinkers we call the pre-Socratics. They lived more than 2.5 millennia ago in the Greek colonies of Asia Minor, southern Italy, and the islands of the Aegean. They wrote in fragments, often in poetic or enigmatic language, and much of their work has been lost. Despite these limitations, their ideas represent a decisive turning point in human thought. They were among the first to challenge mythological explanations and to search for rational accounts of the world. The pre-Socratics did not have modern scientific tools. They had no telescopes, no microscopes, no complex mathematics, and no systematic experiments. The tools they had were human senses, careful observation, and the capacity for bold speculation. They looked at nature and asked questions that had never been posed in that way before. By doing so, they opened a space for philosophical inquiry that remains active to this day. The earliest known philosopher, Thales of Miletus, proposed that the underlying principle of reality is water. At first glance, this seems simplistic, especially considering what we know today about atoms, molecules, and cosmic forces. Yet, Thales' claim was an intellectual breakthrough. It was not the content of the claim that mattered most, but the form of thinking it represented. Thales replaced divine storytelling with the idea that nature has a single, intelligible principle that unifies its diversity. Water, for him, was not simply a liquid. It was a substance capable of transforming itself into different states, such as ice and vapor, and thus capable of explaining the variety of natural forms. Behind the many visible things, Thales sought a single permanent reality. This search for unity beneath multiplicity was the beginning of metaphysical reflection. Anaximander, another philosopher from Miletus, found the idea of a concrete element too restrictive. He argued that the origin of all things could not be something specific like water, because water has definite characteristics that make it unsuitable as the ultimate source. Instead, he proposed the apeiron, a boundless, indefinite principle without shape, limits, or particular qualities. The apeiron was an inexhaustible background from which all opposites, such as hot and cold or moist and dry, separate and eventually return. Anaximander also believed that nature is governed by a kind of cosmic justice that ensures that forces remain in balance. He introduced the idea that the world has an internal logic that does not depend on personal gods. Anaximenes, following the same line of inquiry but with different conclusions, claimed that air is the primary substance of reality. Air, through processes of rarefaction and condensation, could become fire, water, earth, and stones. For Anaximenes, these transformations were not random. They followed predictable patterns. Once again, we find the idea of a unified reality that expresses itself through measurable processes. The Milesians were trying to understand nature as a continuous and ordered system, something that could in principle be explained without appealing to myth. While the Milesians looked for a material principle, the Pythagoreans proposed a more radical answer. They argued that the essence of the world is found not in matter, but in number. Pythagoras and his followers observed that musical harmony could be expressed in mathematical ratios, and from this, they inferred that the entire cosmos is governed by similar numerical relations. The world, they believed, is a kind of living geometry, an ordered structure whose laws can be grasped through mathematics. Although the Pythagorean approach includes mystical elements, it anticipates a central theme of modern science: the idea that mathematics is not only a language for describing reality, but may reflect its very structure. Xenophanes, another influential pre-Socratic thinker, criticized the anthropomorphic portrayals of the gods found in Greek mythology. He argued that humans create gods in their own image, reflecting their own limitations. Xenophanes proposed a more abstract conception of the divine, something unified, and unlike mortals, in body or mind. In doing so, he encouraged a shift from mythological imagination to philosophical reflection on the nature of reality. Among the pre-Socratics, Heraclitus of Ephesus presented the most striking doctrine of universal change. According to him, everything flows, and permanence is an illusion created by human perception. He believed that the world is in constant motion, a ceaseless exchange of opposites symbolized by fire. Yet Heraclitus did not think this flux was chaotic. He posited the existence of the logos, a rational structure that governs the dynamic transformation of things. Most people fail to grasp the logos because they cling to stability and resist recognizing the unity of opposites. Heraclitus invites us to see the world as a living process, perpetually reshaped by conflict and balance. Parmenides, from the city of Elea, offered a radically different vision. He argued that change is impossible and that reality is one, indivisible, eternal, and unchanging. For Parmenides, the appearance of change arises from human error. He reasoned that if something changes, it either comes into being or passes away. Yet coming into being from nothing is impossible, and ceasing to exist into nothing is equally impossible. Therefore, truth must be timeless and uniform. Parmenides' argument forced later philosophers to confront the problem of how change can be reconciled with the requirement that something cannot arise from nothing. The tension between Heraclitus' flux and Parmenides' permanence became one of the central puzzles of metaphysics. Empedocles attempted to reconcile the insights of Heraclitus and Parmenides. He maintained that the ultimate constituents of reality are four eternal elements, which he called roots: earth, air, fire, and water. These elements do not come into being or perish. What we call creation or destruction is simply the mixing or separating of elements. Two forces, love and strife, govern this process. Love brings elements together, while strife separates them. Empedocles thus allowed for both unity and change by introducing a dynamic interplay of forces acting upon permanent substances. Anaxagoras proposed that everything contains a portion of everything else. All substances are mixtures, and nothing is entirely pure. For instance, bread contains the materials of bones and flesh in potential form. What introduces order into this mixture is nous, which can be translated as mind. Nous initiates motion and establishes cosmic structure. This is one of the earliest appearances of a philosophical idea that mind is a fundamental aspect of the cosmos rather than a local accident. The atomists, Leucippus and Democritus, developed an even more ambitious theory. They claimed that all things consist of tiny indivisible atoms moving through the void. Atoms differ only in shape, arrangement, and position, and all observable phenomena result from their combinations and collisions. Although their understanding of atoms was speculative, the idea that the world is composed of minute, unchanging entities prefigures the mechanistic worldview that would later emerge in modern science. These pre-Socratic thinkers were united by a common desire to understand the arche, the fundamental principle of all things, or the origin of all things. Their answers were different, ranging from water to air and to number, fire, mind, and atoms, but they all believed that the world has an underlying structure accessible to reason. In this sense, they laid the foundations not only for metaphysics, but for scientific inquiry. The pre-Socratics are important not because they discovered the correct physical explanation of nature, but because they identified the types of questions that define metaphysics. They asked what reality is made of, how change is possible, why there is order, and whether diversity hides a deeper unity. These questions continue to animate metaphysical thinking today. Modern physics may speak of quantum fields, space-time geometry, and fundamental particles, yet it addresses the same concerns. What is the basic stuff of the universe? How do complexity and structure arise from simplicity? Are the laws of nature descriptive or constitutive? Does change occur at the deepest level or only at the level of appearance? These are metaphysical questions framed in a scientific vocabulary. Metaphysics, then, is the attempt to see the world beneath the world, to look beyond immediate appearances and grasp the underlying structure of reality. The pre-Socratics provide a first map of this intellectual territory, even though some of their paths turned out to be dead ends. They showed that the world can be investigated through reason, and that human beings can step back from the familiar to ask radically new questions. Their legacy also teaches us intellectual humility, since even the boldest metaphysical system can be incomplete or mistaken. Yet, without such boldness, philosophical inquiry would not exist. The pre-Socratics remind us that the search for understanding begins when someone dares to ask why the world is the way it is. To understand why metaphysics matters, consider something as simple as a wooden chair. When you look at it, you see its shape, color, texture, and function. You know what it is for. You know how to use it, and you recognize it as the same chair you saw yesterday. Yet beneath these obvious features lie several philosophical puzzles, like what makes this chair the same chair despite the small changes it undergoes? Is the chair identical with the particular pieces of wood that compose it, or does its identity depend on its form and function? Is the chair's purpose something inherent in it, or something imposed by human users? If you burn the chair, what exactly is destroyed and what remains? These are metaphysical questions hidden within a familiar object. Think also of yourself. You believe you are the same person you were 10 years ago, even though your body has changed, and many of your memories have faded or transformed. What exactly grounds this continuity? Is it your body, your brain, your memories, or something else? The question of personal identity is a metaphysical one, and it affects how you understand responsibility, relationships, and your own developing story. If you say that a promise you made last year binds you today, you are assuming a strong form of personal continuity. If you doubt whether someone who suffers a large psychological change remains fully the same person, you are touching the metaphysics of identity. Even our experience of time is shaped by metaphysical assumptions. We speak of time passing, but we never actually witness time itself. We experience moments one after another, and from this we infer a flow. Is this flow real? Do past and future exist in the same way the present does? Or is only the present real? Philosophers disagree, and each position carries profound implications for how we conceive change, causation, and human freedom. Once you begin noticing metaphysical questions in ordinary situations, you realize that they are everywhere. They arise whenever we reflect on existence, identity, change, cause, possibility, or time. They remind us that beneath the surface of our daily routines lies a deeper landscape that invites exploration. And they show us that everyday objects, personal relationships, and familiar emotions all rest on assumptions that can be examined and understood more clearly. Some people believe that modern science has made metaphysics unnecessary. Yet science itself depends on metaphysical assumptions. Scientific theories presuppose the existence of laws, the uniformity of nature, the reality of causal relations, the persistence of entities, and the possibility of objective truth. Scientists may rarely discuss these assumptions explicitly, but their work relies on them. Metaphysics and science are not rivals, they complement each other. Science investigates how the world behaves, while metaphysics explores what must be true of the world for such investigations to be possible. Moreover, metaphysics nourishes personal reflection. It encourages us to ask what really matters, what we believe about the world and why we believe it. It trains our capacity for careful thought and helps us develop intellectual independence. It teaches us not to take our deepest convictions for granted. In moments of doubt or confusion, metaphysical reasoning can illuminate the hidden roots of our beliefs. It helps us understand why we trust certain explanations and reject others. It also fosters tolerance for difference, because it shows that worldviews vary and that disagreement can often be traced back to contrasting metaphysical foundations. Metaphysics matters because it influences the choices we make. A person who thinks the world is meaningless may approach life differently from someone who believes that reality has inherent purpose. A person who thinks the self is nothing more than a temporary bundle of experiences may relate to personal identity, responsibility, and hope differently from someone who believes the self has a stable core. These are metaphysical orientations, and they shape everything from friendships to political views. Without some awareness of the metaphysical principles we rely on, we risk living unreflectively guided by assumptions we have never examined and that may not serve us well. As we move through this series of lectures, we will follow the spirit of the pre-Socratics who dared to look beneath appearances and question the basic structure of reality. We will examine the categories of existence, the nature of space and time, the logic of identity, the workings of causation, the structure of possibility, the mysteries of consciousness, the puzzle of free will, the conditions of personal identity, the architecture of objects, and the nature of social reality. Finally, we will consider how all these layers of existence fit together into a coherent worldview. Our aim is not to memorize doctrines, but to refine our ability to think deeply. Metaphysics invites us to recognize the hidden assumptions that shape our understanding of the world and to examine them with care. It asks us to reflect on what kind of reality we live in and what kind of beings we are. Once you begin to see the metaphysical dimension of life, it becomes impossible to unsee it. You start noticing that every experience, every relationship, every scientific theory, and every personal decision carries metaphysical weights. The pre-Socratics reminds us that philosophy begins with wonder. They urge us to look at the world with fresh eyes and to recognize that beneath its familiar surface lies an extraordinary depth. This first lecture marks the beginning of that journey.